Now we will take you through the rest of the Spring 2023 exhibition at the Bahr Gallery. This Dayglow silkscreen headshot poster was made by Pro Arts, Inc. in Medina, Ohio, and is dated 1970. A headshot poster is the broadly accepted term for the psychedelic posters from the late 1960s and 70s that were sold in poster stores or head shops, or in my case, in the New York area, it was Spencer Gifts. These are distinguished from the psychedelic posters that advertise concerts, which are much more common and well known. The silkscreen process lets the artist really pour on the paint for a vibrant, rich color effect, but with silkscreens that are this old, there is also now some cracking of the paint. Artist Tom Gatz was born in Detroit in 1943. He actually served in the Air Force in Vietnam and came back and settled in Kent, Ohio, where for a few years in the early 1970s produced psychedelic posters for Pro Arts until he moved to St. Petersburg, Florida in 1972. Unlike the posters advertising the concerts in the late 1960s, there is little scholarship about headshot posters. Silkscreens took longer than machine lithographs to make, and so they were frequently printed in small batches as demand required, and so there is not a way to tell which printing the poster is. Given that few of these posters lasted even a decade, it's a wonder then that any are left at all. This image has plenty of hidden treasures, including a couple making love, a ship to new lands, peacock feathers, an eyeball, and maybe more. The Acid Queen herself, from the song on the Who's Tommy album, is smoking a classic chamber pipe, small for concealment and often with a screw on top. We know this only from hearsay, of course. To generate positive publicity for Bob Dylan's greatest hits, released in March 1967, CBS Records commissioned Milton Glaser to design a special poster to be folded and included with the album. Taking inspiration from a Marcel Duchamp self-portrait, Glaser depicted Dylan in profile, his abundantly curly hair rendered in saturated colors that stood out in high contrast from the white background. The energetic design with its swirling streams of color evokes the visual effects of psychedelics. Echoing stylistic qualities of Art Nouveau and in line with his dictum that just enough is more, Glaser also invented his own typeface for this poster for the single word Dylan. He writes that this was just an accident. I kind of had it on my desk at that time, and I said, if I have to use the word Dylan, I'll use this typeface, largely because there wasn't anything that looked quite like it around, and I wanted to make the word itself look peculiar. The face in profile has been hailed as the ultimate expression of the psychedelic style in an American poster. The original first printing of this poster has been backed with linen to preserve it and lessen the original fold marks. Milton Glaser was among the most celebrated graphic designers in the United States. Founder of New York Magazine, designer of countless posters for Pushpin Studios, which he co-founded, and plus illustrations in magazine logos and designs. Glaser is also very famous for having created the I Heart New York logo. Speaking of Mr. Dylan, this large silkscreen of a psychedelic Bob Dylan was done by Poster Prints in Conshohocken, Pennsylvania in 1969. Poster Prints was one of many printing companies that sprang up around the country in the late 1960s to handle the huge demand for posters from America's youth. Poster Prints created both psychedelic posters like this one, and also what were called personality posters, the giant blow-up photo of movie stars, typically in black and white. Posters were an inexpensive way for teenagers to express themselves. They were large, they didn't require frames, or even a hook and a hammer to hang, and they could be swapped out as soon as a new movie or rock star or image took their fancy. Life magazine wrote a cover story on the exploding market in September of 1967 called The Great Poster Hang-Up. Now, Bob Dylan had been off the performing stage since his motorcycle accident in 1966, so it's doubtful that he authorized this poster, but it's also enough of an original characterization that also didn't use his name that he probably couldn't have stopped it anyway. This poster uses Dayglow inks, and I'd say it's pretty groovy. Mr. Tambourine Man was made famous by the Byrds, and so here we have a 1967 poster featuring that band, made by Saladin Productions. No artist was credited. Saladin produced posters from 1967 through at least 1973, perhaps later, and this Birds poster was similar to a line of very other cool and bright posters for bands like the Jefferson Airplane, the Electric Prunes, the Doors, the Buckinghams, Buffalo Springfield, and the Monkees. Like many of the headshot posters made in the late 1960s to satisfy America's teenage poster craze, not much is known about Saladin. Generally, these companies were in business for a short time and then moved on to chase the next fad. Here is another 1967 Saladin Productions poster featuring the Doors. While not much of anything is known about the company, including the name of the artist, we can tell you that Saladin is the Western name of the Muslim Sultan of Egypt and Syria, who famously defeated a massive army of crusaders and captured the city of Jerusalem in 1187. At the height of his power, he ruled a unified Muslim region stretching from Egypt to Arabia. A popular Egyptian movie called Saladin the Victorious had been released in 1963, and perhaps this influenced the choice of the name for the company. This poster, at this point in time, is probably just about a one-of-a-kind. There is no information about it, about the artist, Donna Dichter, about the company, Underground Distributors, nothing. Made in San Francisco, 1967. That's about it. But let's take a look at some of the detail in this amazing piece. The poster reflects the psychoactive effects of being stoned on pot or tripping. There are a number of words hidden in the poster, as well as many faces and figures. The word acid appears in a few places, but also STP, LSD-25, faith, peace, and love. At the bottom toward the right, we get the name of the artist, Donna Dichter. Here we have a classic 1969 headshot poster featuring Horatio Potblower. The reference is to Horatio Hornblower, a fictional officer in the Royal British Navy during the Napoleonic Wars, and the protagonist of a series of novels and stories by C.S. Forester, first published in 1937. After surviving many adventures, Hornblower rises to become Admiral of the Fleet. Interestingly, the fictional Hornblower was tone deaf. So here we have Hornblower's stoned doppelganger, Admiral Potblower, and he is urging God to save the seeds instead of save the queen. And he declares, "It ain't a free country if a man can't blow what he pleases." The poster was made by somebody named Sheep, and the company was Stone Kingdom Syndicate, published by Graphoto in San Francisco. Just another one of those hundreds of printers around the country meeting the demand for posters during this time. This is an original lithograph published and printed in 1968, and it's called The Inner Eye. Published by East Totem West out of Mill Valley, California, it was printed by Orbit Graphic Arts. Artist Wilfred Satty was German-born and San Francisco-based, and he was one of the better-known poster artists of the late 1960s psychedelic era. His works have been exhibited at the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art, the Museum of Modern Art, the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston, and the National Museum in Warsaw. East Totem West was a short-lived, really just 2 years, 67 and 68, short-lived poster and note card publisher whose artists tried to recreate the LSD experience in print. An enviable task, but about 40 significant psychedelic posters by founders Joe and Irene McHugh, Wilfred Satty, Nick Nichols, and John Hamilton, Phil Bird, and others were the result. John Hamilton, by the way, is the one that famously painted Janis Joplin's Porsche. These posters were sold in dedicated poster stores like the Print Mint in Berkeley and San Francisco's Poster Mat, and they were eagerly bought up by teenagers papering their walls. Satty, the artist, was associated with and hung around with a lot of the other San Francisco rock poster artists, in particular David Singer, with whom he did collaborate on a few rock posters. For a few years, his life was one long summer of love. He staged huge parties where socialites and hippies mingled in a subterranean basement of the 2042 Powell Street house that he had converted into a surreal environment that resembled a cross between a decrepit Victorian-era parlor and something out of a fantasy amusement park. This is a classic 1967 headshot poster created to be sold to 60s teens to put on their wall. If you watched part 2 of our tour, you may recall that the Sunset Foods poster by Robert Fried also featured this hookah-smoking toad. Not much is known about the poster, but it's surely a bucolic and peaceful scene, although ripping with day-glow colors that fluoresce under black lights. Now, it was a caterpillar that was smoking a hookah in Alice in Wonderland, which was a common late 60s meme, by the way. So why do we have a toad? Well, we do know that in 1967, research had just been republished asserting the psychedelic qualities associated with smoking the venom of the Bufo alvarius toad. But that could be a bit of a stretch. Robert Fried was born in Brooklyn in 1937. While not considered one of San Francisco's Big Five psychedelic poster artists, he was valued for his technical skill and creative application of the abstract to a commercial execution. Like Victor Moscoso, he's one of the rare San Francisco school poster artists who was formally trained as an artist and graphic designer. This is one of 5 Bob Fried posters in the Hippie Ethos exhibition. Sadly, Bob Fried left the world way too early in 1975 from a brain aneurysm. This is a super fun poster called Tripping Mandala. A mandala generally represents the spiritual journey, starting from outside to the inner core through layers. In various spiritual traditions, mandalas are used as a spiritual guidance tool to establish a sacred space and aid meditation and trance and focus the attention of practitioners and students alike. By mentally entering the mandala and proceeding toward its center, the viewer is guided through the cosmic processes of disintegration and reintegration. This poster was printed by A. Circia in Los Angeles and is by Joe Roberts Jr., one of the most prominent silkscreen artists of the late 60s and early 1970s. Let's take a closer look. The tripping mandala here has love and peace at its core, which pretty well summed up the hippie utopian dream. Inside the mandala are a whole series of psychedelic visions and introspections, ranging from a cartoon duck courtship scene to seas of holes, the mantra Aum, and a mysterious figure in a cloak. This huge collage of Woodstock photos was created by photographer Bruce Gowans right after the event and published in 1969. There was also a version made with dark green lettering instead of the pink seen here. These posters were printed on very thin paper and were easily damaged or ripped, and very few are left, although it's impossible to know how many. We had this one backed with archival linen to stabilize it and protect it before framing it with museum glass. Woodstock was billed as an Aquarian exposition, 3 days of peace and music. It was held at Max Yasgur's farm in the Catskills near the hamlet of White Lake in the town of Bethel, New York, from August 15th to August 18th, 1969. During the sometimes rainy weekend, 33 acts performed outdoors in front of 500,000 concertgoers. It is widely regarded as a pivotal moment in popular music history. Designed by San Francisco Big Five poster artist Rick Griffin, this handbill is known as the Turkey Trot. The handbill was used to promote a family dog show at the Avalon Ballroom on Thanksgiving Day 1967. It featured Big Brother and the Holding Company with Janis Joplin, as well as Mount Rushmore, a local heavy blues and psychedelic group. Griffin's style is unmistakable in the lettering and central image of this piece. The poster asks, Pilgrim or Indian? And the central figure happens to be Chief Liquidium, whose face occupies the logo for the family dog, which produced the event. At the bottom of the handbill, it promises that the concert will be complete with exotic birds from faraway lands displaying curious plumage, roasting ears, random thoughts, blown minds, feathers, blood sacrifices, incantations, caterwauling, licks, struts, thanks, and thumps. This 1966 collaboration between Wes Wilson and photographer Herb Green is the quintessential Jefferson Airplane and Fillmore poster, with a terrific use of psychedelic coloring, a great photo of the band, and trademark Wes Wilson lettering. Jefferson Airplane had just released their first album, called Takes Off, and 2 months earlier had replaced retiring Signe Anderson with Grace Slick. If you look closely at the background behind the airplane, you will see some small wall etchings. This iconic wall of hieroglyphics was used as a background for the surrealistic pillow cover photography, and it was located in Herb Green's dining room. One day, Green had removed the wallpaper from the room to paint it, but before he had a chance to do that, his roommate drew a bunch of random images there. Green decided to leave it as it was and used it as a backdrop for many portraits of the San Francisco psychedelic musicians. Herb Green was one of the most prolific photographers of the early hate scene in 1965 to 1967. Most of his photos were portraits as opposed to live shots at concerts. Green was friends with many of San Francisco's musicians and worked from the perspective of being a participant within the scene instead of a documenter from the outside. Many of his pictures have become signature portraits of these musicians, and as I speak right now, a terrific retrospective of his work is on display at the Haight Street Art Center in San Francisco. This poster is one of the true high points of the psychedelic poster movement. Perhaps because the job called for advertising multiple shows over 2 weeks, Wes Wilson was able to submerge the headliners behind the simple, mind-blowing summary of the whole trip, calling it The Sound. October 1966. Staggeringly iconic. Wilson, more than any of the other artists at the time, used the nude feminine form as part of his Art Nouveau-influenced, flowing representation of the psychedelic experience, not to mention evoking the sexual revolution that was unfolding at the same time. The woman is joyous, free, and in a state of dancing bliss, with her arms and hair framing the headline. She is voluptuous and sensual and calls out to invite the viewer to join in the experience. Smack in the middle of the Summer of Love, 1967, came this week of shows at the Fillmore. Tuesday through Thursday, the Yardbirds headlined, and Friday, Saturday, and Sunday brought the Doors up from Los Angeles. The poster by Bonnie McLean is one of the finest examples of the psychedelic poster style ever produced, and certainly the apex of McLean's body of work. Now, a month and a half earlier, during a show, Jim Morrison began to twirl his microphone like a lasso around and around, letting it go out a little further over the crowd with each pass. Bill Graham saw this and rushed to the stage in an attempt to stop Jim, but as he approached, the microphone flew out and hit the promoter right in the side of the head. After the show, Graham cursed out Morrison, asking him if he was out of his mind, and Morrison promised to be more careful in future performances. And so, here, on July 28th, prior to the evening's event, Jim presented Bill Graham with a helmet adorned with bright psychedelic colors, with "The Morrison Special" written across the front. This was his apology for drilling him in the head during their last performance. The Doors played marvelously, including an extended 10-minute version of Light My Fire that totally erupted the packed auditorium. Their single, at this point, was up to number 2 on the charts. The band had already started recording their second album, Strange Days, and they were truly at the height of their powers. The Yardbirds at this time featured guitar legends Jeff Beck and Jimmy Page, and they had just been reintroduced to a new crop of fans by releasing a best-of album in March 1967, which went up to number 28. Artist Bob Schnepf's blinding white and yellow graphics gave this poster its nickname, Flash. The Doors headlined and were still riding high following the Summer of Love and their hit single Light My Fire. 4 days earlier, their second album, Strange Days, was released. These 2 shows were played at the theater at 1601 West Evans Avenue in Denver, being leased by San Francisco rock dance promoter The Family Dog. The Family Dog had expanded to Denver that month, an experiment that lasted only until the end of that year, thanks to relentless harassment by the Denver police and overexpansion in general. 1601 West Evans was nicknamed the Denver Dog. Now, Lothar and the Hand People, who were playing with the Doors, were a late 1960s psychedelic rock band known for its spacey music and pioneering use of the theremin and Moog modular synthesizer. The theremin is an electronic musical instrument controlled without physical contact by the thereminist, the performer. The band's unusual name refers to their theremin being nicknamed Lothar, with the Hand People being the musicians in the band. Famously, Jimmy Page of Led Zeppelin typically commanded a theremin on stage during the song Dazed and Confused. Just a quick close-up here. Now, how is this for a physical expression of the hippie ethos, the utopian vision of love, joy, ecstasy, and satori? This poster is for the Mantra Rock Dance, a music-driven event held on January 29, 1967, at the Avalon Ballroom in San Francisco. It was organized by followers of the International Society for Krishna Consciousness as an opportunity for its founder to address a wider public. It was also a promotional and fundraising effort for their first center on the West Coast. The Mantra Rock Dance came just 2 weeks after the famous Gathering of the Tribes, the Human Be-In, in Golden Gate Park. The bands agreed to perform for free, with proceeds donated to the local Hare Krishna temple. The participation of countercultural leaders boosted the event's popularity. Among them were the poet Allen Ginsberg, who led the singing of the Hare Krishna mantra on stage, along with Swami Prabhupada and LSD promoters Timothy Leary and Owsley Stanley. Artist Harvey Cohen designed this promotional poster with a picture of Prabhupada, details of the event, and a request to bring cushions, drums, bells, cymbals. The Mantra Rock Dance concert was later called the Ultimate High and the major spiritual event of the San Francisco hippie era, and it brought the Hare Krishna movement to the wider attention of the American public. Timothy Leary pronounced the event a beautiful night, and Allen Ginsberg called the Mantra Rock Dance the height of Haight-Ashbury's spiritual enthusiasm, the first time there had been a music scene in San Francisco where everybody could be a part of it and participate. The Hare Krishna mantra and dancing became adopted in some ways by all levels of the counterculture and were part of the hippie ethos that is represented in this exhibition. As the movement's popularity with the Haight-Ashbury community continued to increase, Prabhupada and followers would chant and distribute prasad, which is otherwise known as sanctified food, and they became a customary sight at important events in San Francisco. It is only fitting that we conclude our tour of the exhibition with a poster that is probably the most iconic of the era, one that marked both the high point of the hippie ethos, even while much of the utopian ideal had in fact already moved on. The original location for the event was to be in Wallkill, New York, but 4 weeks before the date, the local zoning board banned it. Sam Yasker convinced his father Max to allow the event to be held on their 600-acre dairy farm in Bethel, New York. Now, artist David Bird had already designed a poster for the Wallkill location, but the abrupt change of venue called for a new poster design, and quick. Unfortunately for David Bird, he had left for a 3-week vacation to a place in the Caribbean that didn't have a phone or Wi-Fi, and so he could not be contacted to do a new poster. Arnold Skolnick was pressed into action, and the result is this, one of, if not the, most famous rock poster there is. Skolnick says, co-producer John Roberts approached me on a Thursday afternoon to design a poster for the music festival coming in August. He told me about the festival, 3 days, a lot of music, peaceful, and so on, and he needed it by Monday, by noon. I hired a writer for the brochure, and together we came up with 3 days of peace and music. On Monday morning, I cut all the pieces out with a razor, the bird, the hand, the guitar, the lettering, and pasted them on bright red paper and then delivered the mock-up to the producers. They said, "Do it," and the rest is history. Newsday wrote, "The poster quickly came to symbolize not just the Woodstock Festival, but the ideals of a youth movement then at its height. At a time when much of the artwork associated with rock music had elaborate lettering and images meant to evoke the psychedelic spirit of the age, Skolnick's design stood out in its simplicity: a bird representing peace and a guitar representing music." I hope you enjoyed this tour of the Hippie Ethos exhibition, and also hope that you do have the opportunity to visit in person. We're open Thursday, Friday, and Saturday afternoons, but are often there on other days and happy to show you around. Peace.